John, you mentioned a scraper there, and you were referring to something modern, but I was also thinking of something ancient. You know, a scraper is one of the earliest tools that's been found, a flint scraper, and the reason that has significance for me in the context of your art is because as much as your work can be seen within the context of 20th and 21st century sculpture, very obviously, it also carries resonances of much older traditions, of ancient sculptural traditions. I'm thinking now of your sculpture rather than your drawings, but obviously you're the same artist whether you're doing sculpture or you're doing drawing. Does that make sense to you?
It does in a number of ways. I mean, we were talking yesterday about the bone at the end of somebody's heel, going back to prehistoric times. So in that sense, I think we inherit memory from that point as well. And the primordial brain is a very different kind of brain, and it's a much more, I don't quite know what the word is.
Much more aware of its environment, I suppose.
Yeah, it's much more, yes, environmentally aware. And I think when it is curious when this is a church, or chapel rather, and it's interesting how it contains time and history. And what's more important in this chapel, there's a grand piano in here, and there's other kinds of lighting, which is 21st century. So it's in this time as well, but it links time. It pulls all time into a conscious stream. You may be unconscious of it, but it's subconsciously there. It's activated, so you link up with that. And I think we are very similar. I think for me, there's a richness in that. And I think from one thing I thought about last night, being in here last night, looking at it quietly, what helped to install it here was doing the show in Winchester Cathedral. The show was there, and it was what I learned about from those was how I had to engage with the building, and the rhythms of the building. And once I twigged that in 2000, the hang went very quickly, but it took me half the day to figure that out.
Yeah, you curated a couple of shows in Winchester Cathedral, and I saw the show called Light, and it struck me very much that it was a brilliant show, and all the pieces worked in the places in which you put them, but your work in particular, you had one work in there, which seemed completely at home in that kind of setting, not because it's a Christian work, but because it's intimating a form of spirit, an interest in in the spirit. I won't say spirituality, in the spirit. And this work feels at home in here as well, I think, for very much the same reasons.
Yes, it is very curious. I mean, I can't really answer that. I'm just happy that it's kind of settled down, as it were, and it seems to be fairly okay about being in here, and they seem to be getting on, which is great. And I guess I just need a bit of time to get used to be an observer as opposed to being the person who puts them in and trying to make all that work. And it's hard to get that distance. Also, it's so strange to see them in frames for a start, and then see them in this context so quickly. There's so much stuff going on that it's just almost like an overload. And so I really don't have any. I'm just relieved and delighted that they're sitting so well. Yeah, that's about it really at the moment. That's about it for me. I can't really. I think anything else that comes out, I would rather draw it, as it were. I don't think I would want to talk about it.
Right. I just was wondering about one aspect of the drawings as distinct from the sculpture, or maybe there's not a distinction, but to my mind, a lot of your sculpture is in steel, has been for several years now. And anybody seeing your sculpture is very much struck by how much work it does with light. It's very busy in terms of the way it captures and reflects and reflects the light. The light skids off of it. And particularly in the context of that show called Light, one thought about the centrality of your work and how important light is. Is there any equivalent to that in these drawings? Light is so important to you, but there's a different agenda with the drawing, is there?
I have no idea. But I mean, all I can say is that, I mean, I found the rock pools amazing.
Right.
And where the light was reflected off it, and how little breeze would twinkle it. I noticed going around again, some of the transparent material I'm using, the light catches it in that way, and it was just like, in a way that it was not dissimilar to where the light catches a pool, and the various kinds of interference, whether it's a little rock or a bunch of seaweed or whatever. It's just little ripples in the way the light catches it, and the cloud kind of reflects. There's a kind of dynamic in that which I found fascinating. And I've taken lots of photographs of those kinds of phenomena, and just light on the water and the sky, and watching the two playing, just watching the two playing, talking to each other.
So it's that kind of response to the landscape that really was a catalyst for many of these drawings.
I found it extraordinary, yes, because I guess the earlier sculptures, you know, in the 80s and the 90s, they were very much the urban human experience of walking on platforms or whatever, gantries or escalators or I don't know, whatever, climbing things, or they were urban or engineered or whatever spaces. And I guess that language for me was very new when I came to London from the west coast of Ireland, and it was just a whole different language, a whole way of moving. The body moved through space in a very different way. I suspect that's what made me quite excited about those things, because and seeing other bodies move through it. I remember I had people stand up on some of these sculptures when I was working on, just to get a sense of the scale and what was working and how to place things. When I got confused, or I got myself and trying to figure out, well, that's too low because it should be up here, or you know, whatever. So I suspect, on reflection, and I guess as a kid, you don't have any other landscape to kind of, or mindscape, because it becomes your mindscape to kind of put it against. So if you go into a city, it's very different. And the way your body moves around it, is transported around it, is very, very different.